Good morning. Welcome to the gathering. Last week, we kicked off the book of Esther, this story that happens in Persia about 400 years before Jesus came. And last week, we saw King Xerxes go across to fight the Greeks, and he lost. And now he's returned home, kind of upset, kind of disappointed, kind of defeated, but looking for a new wife, because just before he left, he got rid of his first wife. And remember, some of his buddies said, "Hey, king, here's what we should do. Find you a new wife. We're going to have a pageant. We're going to bring in all the most beautiful women in the kingdom, and we're going to let you decide which one will be the next queen of Persia." And we know that Esther is involved in the pageant. She's one of the ones who's up for selection, and so we're going to pick up the story there today. If you have your Bibles, you can open them to Esther chapter 2. Esther chapter 2, you can pull it up on your phone, your tablet. We'll put the words on the screen as we go. We're going to start in verse 8. "So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel, in custody of Haggai, Esther also was taken into the king's palace and put in custody." I want you to pay attention to the words here. Esther was taken. She didn't volunteer. She didn't choose this. She didn't sign up or scan a QR code somewhere to say, "I want to be in the pageant." She was taken. And notice what it says here. Not only was she taken, but she was put in custody. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that she was imprisoned here, but when we think of the word custody, what does that mean? It means someone who is held somewhere against their will. And there is a very real sense here in which Esther was taken from her home for this pageant, and she's being held now in custody. She doesn't have any choice in the matter. She's taken, she's put into custody of Haggai, who had charge of the women. And the young woman pleased him and won his favor. So Esther gets taken against her will, and she finds herself being watched or guarded or cared for by this guy Haggai, and it says that she won his favor. And this reminds me a lot of the Joseph story. You guys remember the Joseph story, right? So way back at the beginning of the year when we were in Genesis, we met this guy Joseph who gets sold into slavery by his brothers. And then he gets falsely accused and thrown into prison. And all of these bad things happen to him, but at every turn, the people around Joseph love Joseph. In fact, it's the same phrase as here, he finds favor in their eyes. And one of the reasons for that is because Joseph was a guy of great character. But the real reason, the bigger reason, was that God was with him. In fact, in the Joseph story, we see that over and over and over again. It says, "And the Lord was with Joseph." And because God was with Joseph, everywhere he went, people liked him. And that's true for Esther in this story. Now, remember, in the book of Esther, God is never mentioned. But over and over and over in the book, we see the hand of God, the providence of God. And this is one of those places where even though we don't see God, he's working behind the scenes. And everywhere Esther is going to go, people are going to find favor with her because God is with her. Verse 10. "Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known." So Mordecai, he's new to the story. We didn't meet him last week. Mordecai is Esther's uncle. Esther was an orphan. Her parents had died at some point, and she was raised by her uncle Mordecai. And so now, both Esther and Mordecai are living in Persia, even though they're Jewish. And it says here that they hadn't revealed to people that they were actually Jewish, because they had been there for generations. Remember, if you go back a few generations, the Babylonians had invaded Judah, they had destroyed Jerusalem, and they carried much of Jerusalem back to Babylon with them as captives. And now many of those captives had continued to live in Babylon, some in Persia, and other places in that empire. And even until now, several generations later, here's Esther and here's Mordecai. But most people around them don't know that they're Jewish. They just see them as people who are part of the empire. And every day, Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to hear how Esther was and what was happening to her. So Esther is taken. She's a part of this pageant. And while she is gone, Mordecai's walking around trying to find out what's going on with Esther. Is she doing okay? Is she not doing okay? What's happening to her? Finding any information he could. Verse 12. "Now, when the turn came for each young woman to go into King Ahasuerus, after being 12 months, under the regulations for the women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying. 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with spices and ointments for women. So it's a 12-month process. For a whole year, these women are set aside, and they're going through what this like beauty regimen or something. But it's not just about getting them looking good for the king, although that's a big part of it. Because one of the things we'll notice here is that this pageant is all about externals. It's all about the physical. And so much of this is about that, but there's also something else going on here. What they're trying to do is they're trying to take these young women and break them, to take away their own identity so that they no longer are who they once were, but now they are the possession of the king. And so that's what's happening to Esther. She's now isolated from Mordecai, the person who raised her, and presumably from all of her family, all of her friends. She's isolated for 12 months. She's being broken down, so she no longer will have her own identity, but will just be someone who belongs to the king. That's where she finds herself. And when the young woman went to the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. Now I'm going to stop right here. This story is not a PG story. Sometimes we like to think that it is, right? Esther's one of those storybooks. It feels a little bit like, is Esther a Disney princess, right? She's going to get swept off her feet by Prince Charming. That's not what this story is. Now, we're going to keep it PG this morning. But I want you to read between the lines in the next couple of sentences. It's important that you do that because this is written in such a way that you can read between the lines to understand what's actually happening here, what's actually happening to Esther. Because if you don't grasp this, you're going to miss the big picture. All right? So, when the young woman went into the king this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. And in the evening she would go in, and in the morning she would return. Are you doing the math? So they're isolated for 12 months, stripped of their identity, forced to focus on all the externals, all the physicalities. And now they're going to go in and meet with the king in the evening and leave in the morning. This is not a brunch date. Okay? So all of these women who were taken from their homes are going through this process. And look what it says next. They return to the second harem in the custody of Shashgaz. That name has to be said that way. Shashgaz. The king's eunuch who is in charge of the concubines. Okay, again, pay attention to the details here. So they leave in the evening. They're done in the morning. And they go to a different place. It's identified as the second harem. Remember, they start over here. This is where they do their year-long thing, their 12 months. And now they go through this one night, and now they're put over here, and their name has changed. They are now referred to as the concubines. So something's happened between the evening and the morning that's changed their status. And listen to this, and then she would not go into the king again unless the king delighted in her and she was summoned by name. So now these young women are going to live out the rest of their lives here. They'll never see the king again. After spending the night with him, they will never see him again unless he asks for them by name. Now, everything we've learned to this point about King Ahasuerus tells us that he's not going to remember their names because he's not that kind of guy. And so these young women, most of them, will spend the rest of their lives just in this place, captives of the king, owned by the king, concubines of the king, but will never see the king again. Essentially, their life is over. So these were the best and the brightest of the kingdom. A year ago, they had their whole life ahead of them. They were taken. They were put in a place for a year. They went through one night with the king, and now they will live out the rest of their lives never being married, never having a relationship, just simply being the possessions of the king. This is where they find themselves. You understand? This is essentially trafficking. And this is where Esther finds herself. She's right in the middle of this. Understand that nothing about this was chosen by Esther. She didn't choose to be in the pageant. She wouldn't have chosen to be in the pageant. She didn't desire it. It wasn't what she wanted. It wasn't what she needed. It wasn't what she expected out of life. None of this was chosen by Esther. And here's what that means. If you're in a place today where you feel like nothing going on around you is chosen by you, like life feels a little bit out of control. There are things happening that I didn't want, that I didn't desire, that I didn't choose, that I don't even think I need. All this is happening to me and around me. If that's where you find yourself today, then you can understand Esther. And that means that what happens next is for you. Now we know that Esther wins the pageant, right? We don't know what happens that night when she's with the king. We know that the king chooses her, and she becomes the queen of Persia. Now, she still has to live out her life not going to see the king unless he summons her, but he probably does from time to time. As Esther, let's go have lunch together, right? Let's go hang out or whatever. But this is her life now. She's now the queen. And here the story jumps ahead. Before we get to the next chapter, the story jumps ahead almost 5 years. So Esther's been queen for about 5 years. Chapter 3 starts this way. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman the Agagite. So here's another new character, Haman the Agagite. We're going to come back in 2 weeks to talk about why that title is important, that he's called an Agagite. But he's the son of Hammedatha. Isn't this fun? Why couldn't they be like Bill and John and Sam and Joe? And advanced him and set his throne above all the officials who were with him. So Haman is now set up as the second in command to Xerxes. Xerxes is the king of all Persia, and Haman is his number one guy. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gates bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. So every time Haman goes through the courtyards, everybody's got to bow to him because he's so important. But Mordecai doesn't. Now remember, in the book of Esther, we never see God named. And whenever we talk about Mordecai, it never tells us that Mordecai is a faithful follower of God. It never says that in here. But there's these little hints in different places that say maybe he is. And here's one of those hints. Is that he's unwilling to bow down to another person because that's something a Jewish person was never to do. Verse 5. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with fury. He gets mad because he's not getting what he deserved. He's not getting what he wants. He's being mistreated by someone. Haman sees himself as the victim, and so he's angry. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, so as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, so somebody told him, hey, Mordecai's a Jew, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews. Let me pause for a second here. This is not the first time in history that someone had tried to destroy God's people. Right? Remember Egypt? It happened there. And this would not be the last time in history that someone would try to destroy all of God's people. In fact, we know it happens over and over. In fact, world history is marked by this, people trying to destroy the Jewish people. And yet they never do. Because God always cares for his people. And God always will care for his people. But Haman wants to destroy them. Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. The whole kingdom, if you remember last week, includes 127 provinces. And included in that is Jerusalem. So this is no longer just a story in Persia. This is no longer just Persia and Babylon. This extends everywhere, all the way back to Jerusalem. By this time, there were many Jewish people who had returned to Jerusalem, had rebuilt the city, had rebuilt the temple, and were trying to rebuild their lives. And Haman's plan is to kill all of them as well. So then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. and their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws. Now this was partially true, because the Jewish laws were different than the Persian laws. And there were some things that the Jewish people would not do that the Persians would. There are some things that the Persians would not do that the Jewish people would. Their laws were different. This was true. So that it is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. That's not true. Because even though the Jewish people were different because they followed God's law, they were actually of great benefit to the Persian Empire. But you see, what Haman has done here is something that people often do, is they'll take a little bit of truth and mix it with a lie to deceive you. Be very careful. Whenever someone tries to convince you that someone else is a bad person by telling you truth. Oftentimes, if someone wants to turn me against someone else, they'll give me a little truth and they'll mix it with a little lie. That's what Haman does here. So he says, if it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed. Verse 13, letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with instruction to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. So that's going to be in early March if you care about the Jewish calendar. But a copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province by the proclamation to all the people to be ready for that day. So essentially, it's like Haman sends out this letter to the entire kingdom that says, hey, we're going to have a purge. On this day, the first week of March, get yourselves ready, be prepared, because you're allowed to kill any Jewish people you want. And our goal is to destroy them all, to wipe them off the face of the earth. Now, it probably goes without saying here that nothing about this was chosen by the Jews. No Jewish person was like, hey, I really hope that the kingdom tries to slaughter us. I really hope that they try to wipe us off the face of the earth. But it feels very much like, if you're a Jewish person in this scenario, that your life is out of control. And so you see, the theme in these early chapters of Esther is the same. The theme for Esther and the theme for her people is the same. They find themselves in a place that feels very out of control. What do you do? What do you do when life comes at you like that? When you find yourself in a place where you feel like, man, I don't know what to do. I didn't choose this. I didn't want this. I don't know how to handle this. Well, you've heard me say this before. I'm going to say it again. When you find yourself in a place where life is out of control, work at what you can control and pray about the rest. That's going to be Mordecai's advice to Esther. In this story, at this point, it really feels like the bad guys are in control. And the good guys lack all control. And the whole world feels out of control. And so into that moment comes Mordecai to speak to Esther, to essentially say, Esther, what we got to do here is we got to work at what we can control and pray about what we can't. This is what he says. This is chapter 4, verse 13. He says, Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. He says, Esther, this is about all of us. They're going to try to kill all of us. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Mordecai says, Esther, you cannot control what Haman does. You cannot control what the king does. But you can control whether or not you are frozen by fear. He says, if you do nothing, Esther, that's going to be the end for your family. But he does say, if you do nothing, deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. This is another one of those little hints that Mordecai does believe in God, and he actually does trust in God, because essentially what he's saying is, even in this situation, Esther, God is still in control. It may not feel like it right now, but God is still in control. However, even when God is in control, he still gives us the opportunity to take action. And Esther, in this moment, God did not put you right here, right now, to do nothing. Like Esther's been through a lot to get where she is, hasn't she? She was taken. She was held in custody. She went through a year of isolation. She went through a night of who knows what. She had the fear of being set away for the rest of her life. Now she's been a queen for 5 years. And Mordecai saying, Esther, how do you know that God hasn't put you here for this purpose? How do you know that God doesn't have you right here, right now, for such a time as this? And that's true for you too. That God has you right here, right now, for such a time as this. I don't know what kind of time you're having in life right now. So some of you probably feel like life is really under control. It's really good. And some of you probably feel like life is way out of control. Some of you may be in a season of celebration. Some of you may be in a chapter of grief. Some of you may be enjoying abundance, and some of you might really be lacking. Some of you may be feeling right now life is really, really bad, and some of you are saying life is really, really good. Wherever you are, whatever is going on in your life right now, God has you right here, right now, for such a time as this. God has you right here, right now, for a purpose. See, whatever's going on in your life, whether it's in control or out of control, whether it's something you chose or something you didn't choose, God has you here because he wants to develop something in you. You are here for your own growth. See, maybe God wants to change something about you. Maybe he wants to cut off some of the sharp edges. Maybe he wants to help you look more like Jesus so you can be who you were created to be and experience the life you were created to live. Maybe the reason God has you right here, right now, is for your own good. But you won't experience that if you're frozen with fear. You won't experience that if you bail out because of anxiety. But if you choose to work at what you can control and pray about what you cannot, you will experience what God has you here to experience. Sometimes we're in the moment we are, not necessarily for our own growth, but for someone else's good. It may be that what you're going through right now is for the good of someone else. That through you, someone else might be encouraged or helped along. That maybe God is giving you an experience that you can use later to help someone else, to encourage them, to pull them along, to give them a push, to give them what they need. Sometimes God puts us in places at times for the good of others. And again, if I choose to bail out, if I choose to be absent, if I choose to quit, I'll miss out on all of that. Sometimes God has us in a place for our growth. Sometimes it's for others' good. And always it's for his glory. You see, the reality is that how I handle the situations that come at me gives me the opportunity to give glory to God. If when my life is out of control, if I find myself in a place that I didn't choose, if those are the times when I turn to him, where I find those small things that I can control and I work hard at them, but with the rest I give it to him and I trust in him, I rely on him. In those moments, people see me and God is glorified. And it gives me the opportunity to point others to him. So here's my challenge for you this week. As you go through your life this week, you are going to find yourself in moments, right? And in those moments, you might say, I didn't choose this. I didn't want this. But realize that God has me right here, right now, for a purpose. So I'm going to look around. And whether this is for my own growth or for someone else's good, I know it's for God's glory. I'm going to look around and I'm going to find what is it that I can do right now. Maybe it's a word I can say or an action I can take or an attitude I can choose. What am I going to do right now? And with the rest, I'm just going to give it to him. I'm going to work at what I can control. I'm going to pray about what I cannot.